Hey there, I'm Sarah Porritt, and you are tuning in to the Hear Us Roar podcast. Join me for inspired conversations with Asian women, chatting about how ideas and passions can ignite truly transformative journeys. On today's episode, you'll learn how Lucia Liu shifted from working in corporate America to becoming a professional chocolatier after launching her brand Lululosophy. Not only is Lucia currently rocking a full-time role on a global strategic partnerships team within the financial services sector, she's also the proud founder and CEO of Rock the Boat, a podcast and community organization focused on Asians who challenge the status quo. Sound familiar? One of the most important things that I've learned from Lucia is that having ambition doesn't have to come at the price of work-life balance.
The hustler speak of you can have it all and you should strive for everything and you should just hustle and work, 16-hour days and make it work. There are a lot of people who succeed in doing it, and that's fine. And if that works for you, I think that's great. I think what I learned is it doesn't work for me.
I was introduced to Lucia a few months back through our common friend Adele Lim, the ultimate gracious connector. Since then, we've spent hours supporting each other in our podcasting endeavors and noodling on ways to enrich the AAPI creators in this space. Some of the more prominent voices that Lucia's championed through her pod include presidential candidate Andrew Yang, as well as Adele Lim, screenwriter for Crazy Rich Asians, and Kevin Lin, co-founder of Twitch. Before we get into it, let's start at the beginning of Lucia's story.
I was born in Shanghai. My parents are both Shanghainese. I came to the States when I was 3, a year after my dad came to the States for his PhD in electrical engineering. He's a big nerd. And as a family, we lived in Ohio as one of the first states. Then we kind of moved around to 6 other different states. Afterwards, right before I started 9th grade, my dad decided it was like the dot-com bubble, and he actually ended up getting laid off. So he left his job in Silicon Valley and then went back to Shanghai to start a business and become an entrepreneur. My mom and I stayed in, at the time we lived in California, so we stayed in California for, another 6 months. I finished up my middle school and then moved to Shanghai with my parents right before starting 9th grade. The first day of school was so weird because my parents didn't have enough money to send me to an international school at that point because my dad was basically bootstrapping his company. So he made no income, and my mom moving back to Shanghai, she wasn't able to really find a job. And so we weren't living the high life or anything in Shanghai. And so my parents were like, well, are you okay going to local school? And I was like, yeah, I'll sure. Why not? Because my cousin had done it. And so I actually had to go in as an auditing student. So I wasn't an official student. So I actually don't have 9th grade grades. And I remember first day of school, I didn't have a uniform. Everybody wore uniforms. And I had my nails painted electric blue. I had hoop earrings. And I walk into school, I was wearing shorts. And the first thing a kid in the bathroom was Lao Shi Hao. So she thought I was a teacher. And I was oh, I'm not a teacher. And yeah, it was the first day after class, I went home and I was Mom, I didn't understand anything. The math problems were written in Chinese. And so I couldn't do the math problems because they were word problems. And they were already on year 2 of physics. They were starting chemistry. And then Chinese class was just they were learning a lot of ancient Chinese literature. And so I think the first exam, Chinese exam, I got a 24 out of 150 points or something. It was crazy.
Honestly, that sounds like something out of a nightmare. I hate to say it, but it's like those dreams that you have where you're just not prepared for college. There's an exam tomorrow and somehow you just don't know anything and you didn't study. You have some guts, girl. But you know what?
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. I've told you this before. I like how you push me as a friend and as a business partner, and I love that you're almost comfortable being uncomfortable, and something that's so foreign and different to you. You're talking about it as if it's like, this is funny and cool, like I kind of dig that. So I don't know how you did it.
I think looking back, it is kind of funny. Like just thinking about how I'm not gonna like sugarcoat it. It was a tough year. It was a very, very tough year. And, in the interim, I actually ended up getting sick. But like, it's like kind of one of those things that really is a blessing and a curse. It's because of that year that I actually think like I ended up getting into Penn because I went to local school and I wrote about that experience in my college essay. And I think it was just a very unique experience that I don't think a lot of other people experience.
So what did you end up studying when you went to Penn?
I ended up studying communications. Don't ask me why. I was really interested in psychology, actually. When I first started at Penn, I did end up getting a psychology major. But I was also really interested in marketing. And so communications was a course that was offered in the college. So Penn is pretty pre-professional. It's like split between many different schools. So you could go to Wharton, which is like the business school, and I think Penn is most well known for Wharton, and it's like the best undergraduate business school program. I had gotten into the college. I was actually the first person to get into Penn from my high school, and the story there was someone from Penn came and gave a presentation at our high school, and I had never heard of Penn at that time. I also didn't know, like, I think my parents and I were like, well, we don't really know what college I would get into. I don't have ninth grade grades because I went to local school for a year. So I was like, I don't know if these colleges will accept me. So I kind of applied to the gamut. Like I applied to everything because I didn't know where I was going to fall.
Know. Yeah. No, same, because I quit high school twice. And so
for your singing career, right?
For my singing career. And so I did the same thing. Literally, it ran the gamut. Who knows? I might get into a really good school. I might get into an okay school, but let me just try it all out and see where I land. But hey, it worked out.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the story.
While at Penn, Lucia thought that, like many of her classmates, her path would lead her to consulting. But instead, she exited college and entered the doors of a financial services company. As someone who doesn't feel like my day's truly complete without savoring a smooth chocolate truffle after dinner, I was way too eager to dive into how Lucia shifted gears in transforming into a chocolatier.
I have to say that I definitely became fat or fatter.
Wait, real fat or Chinese fat?
I ate a lot of my own failed concoctions.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. No, but it was definitely a fun time. I think you were right in saying how I enjoy putting myself into situations that are a little uncomfortable, but then trying to like find my way through all of it. I think that's probably because growing up, I was constantly moving from place to place and constantly adapting myself to new environments. And so it felt like discomfort was a way to grow. And being with Asian parents, and especially like my parents, I think they just have a mentality of always wanting to be better. And so I always had this mentality of I want to make myself better. So the reason why I started the chocolate business was because after working for 4 years in a corporate environment, it felt like I lacked a lot of the hard skills that I thought were really useful. I was decent at doing some analytics work, but a lot of the true marketing work or a lot of the true work was getting done by agencies that we worked with.
Yep.
And so I felt like I wanted to do something more tangible. Like I wanted ownership over a product. I wanted to be hands-on with something. And at the time, I had moved over to a division in the travel space and I wasn't enjoying it. And so I started kind of tinkering in my kitchen, and I started making chocolates based off of YouTube videos. And I would like bring them to work and make all my colleagues try them. And it was pretty fun. This was like around the time when, I don't know if you've heard of Vosges Chocolat, but it's like this like couture chocolate brand. And the woman who created it is famous for making bacon chocolate as well as curry chocolate.
Okay.
And so she was like mixing these really interesting flavors. And I thought, hey, that sounds cool. I haven't seen any Asian flavors in chocolates. And so that's when I started experimenting with different Asian flavors like milk tea or like black sesame, Thai tea, chai.
You know, I literally just got goosebumps. I am such a fat kid.
Me too. That's why we get along.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so I was trying all these different types of flavors. And one day I was scrolling around on the internet and I found that Smorgasburg, which is this like big food market out in Williamsburg, they were looking for a chocolate vendor and they were hosting a chocolate contest. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just like email them or apply and see what happens, right? And, I think literally like hours after I submitted the email, they said, yeah, great. Like you're in, bring your stuff and come over the weekend and you'll have a booth. People will vote for whichever chocolate shop can get like a permanent space at Smorgasburg. And so I was like, oh, wow, this is crazy. And what ended up happening was I spent like the whole week kind of making the first batch of chocolates and like building my own website so that I was like a legit thing. And like invited a whole bunch of friends over the night before and they were like helping me pack chocolates and like making signs for Lululosophy. And I remember the next day, like lugging all my stuff over to Smorgasburg, and I had like a tablecloth, some fairy lights, and a sign, right? Versus like across the table, there's like these big like companies that were out in upstate New York. Like they were in the competition. There was like another one that was its own little small business, and they had like somebody install the booth. Oh, geez. Right?
So you're the obvious underdog here.
Yeah. I was this like little like, person in the kitchen making chocolates. And so we were like just giving out samples throughout the day. Like I posted it on Facebook and I invited all my friends and we just like were letting people taste our chocolates. And I was very blessed, but like we ended up selling out at the end of the day. We had a lot of votes, which was really exciting. And so like went home, pretty happy about the results. People really enjoyed the flavors. It was very new. And a week later, they reached out and said, hey, you won the contest. So now you have a permanent space at Smorgasburg. And that was like insane. And so that was when I kind of decided like I'm going to incorporate it as an LLC. I was also thinking at the time, right, like, because I wasn't enjoying my job as much, I was deciding on whether I should go to a smaller company to like get more hands-on experience or if I should go back to business school. I never had the conviction to take the GMATs though. And so maybe that's probably why like I didn't actually do it. But the other option was maybe I could start my own and really learn the ropes of starting and owning a business. And so this opportunity for Smorgasburg came up, and that's kind of when I was like, I'm going to go for it. And so I quit my job and started selling chocolates at Smorgasburg as like a good test and learn sort of environment. And throughout, like because of Smorgasburg, I actually ended up getting a lot of like inbound traffic because people, love discovering new foods at Smorgasburg. And so, in the interim, Mercedes-Benz reached out. Like, so I catered for the Mercedes-Benz lounge. In Manhattan, I reached back out to like, Amex. At the time they were launching their Centurion lounges. So I cater for the Centurion lounges in Vegas and in Miami. I ended up getting a standing order at the Park Hyatt when they first opened in their spa. And so it was just such an incredible experience being able to sell chocolates for a living. But it was also incredibly hard, right? Because I was doing all of the production myself, and I didn't really know how to build a team. I felt very shy about getting a partner because it wasn't sexy or that exciting. There weren't that many other Asian Americans in the food space at that point of time.
Yeah.
Exactly. And my parents were like, what are you doing? They're like, why are you wasting an Ivy League degree to schlep chocolates around? And they were really worried about my health because they were like, well, you're pulling 18-hour shifts in the kitchen. What are you doing? It was a tough time to have to sort of do all the production and run the business at the same time. I wasn't confident about selling my product.
Even though Lucia was starting to gain some real traction with her brand, she ultimately decided that it was time to move on from her chocolate dreams. It can be really lonely being a solo entrepreneur. Lucia ended up getting her real estate license, which serendipitously launched her into the startup world. Throughout this whole experience, Lucia had also been drawn to the idea of podcasting as a form of intimate storytelling. A few years later, and after having had a bad experience with one particular startup, Lucia and her friend Lynn decided to introduce the world to Rock the Boat.
We started doing some small things. We did a focus group to see whether or not people would be interested in a career handbook, right? that highlighted stories of Asian Americans. And then a lot of people were like, well, why Asians specifically? Why Asian Americans? Why not for everybody? And we were like, well, I think we need to start niche and we need to start with the things that are close to us. I think Asian Americans have specific needs that other people don't really understand. And when we did our research and looked around, there really weren't any resource guides for Asian Americans. A lot of the issues that Asian Americans face in the workplace are different from the issues that other people face, right? Other junior people
absolutely.
face.
Yep.
And so we felt like we needed to have a specific resource dedicated to the Asian American community. We also did a storytelling event to kind of kick things off. And I think we initially had planned to launch May of 2018. And that didn't really happen. And so it was kind of just back and forth when we just put our foot down and I was like, Lynn, we're going to launch on my birthday. Let's just launch the podcast on my birthday. Well, I have 3 episodes ready. And at that point we had already interviewed 20 people
in the
repository.
Okay. So you were prepared.
We were prepared. We had interviewed about 20 people. We had interviewed them on our phones. So everything was recorded on our dinky little iPhones. The first episode was entirely recorded on our iPhones. And we thought, okay, well, how do we even start this series or this podcast? And we kept talking about it because we were like, okay, well, what is it that Asian Americans need? This theme came up where it was Asian American parents have this specific view of what a good career is. They want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, in finance, in a reputable career. And there's a lot of people who want to be creatives or who want to explore creative sides of their lives. And so we were just talking about why? Why is it that in the Asian American community, there's these prestigious types of careers. And then there's the people who are traveling non-traditional paths. And that's when we started really thinking, oh, maybe it's a Maslow's hierarchy, right? Because they didn't have the privileges that we have today.
Yes, that totally makes sense.
And so we were thinking, okay, we can't tell a story about, hey, screw the older generation, break out of your mold and don't listen to what everybody else says. Do your own thing and pursue your passions. That wasn't the message that we wanted to tell. The message that we wanted to tell was because of the sacrifices and the things that our parents have done for us to bring us to this country, to give us a stable life, to give us the opportunity for a good education, we are now able to step on their shoulders and reach a bit higher. And it's with that platform and that foundation that we can look to self-actualize, that we can reach for higher ground, that we can pursue things that they never had the privilege of pursuing.
I think that's such an astute insight. I love that in many of our conversations, you give so much credit to the parents. I even catch myself taking my circumstances for granted here and there because I did feel like when I got into music, for instance, I was being very rebellious and there was a level of resentment for my parents not maybe overtly supporting me. But a part of me always felt very guilty as well because I knew how much they sacrificed. I knew how much it wouldn't be possible for me to do what I was doing if not for me standing on their shoulders, to your point, to reach a little higher. So I love that that's sort of like the foundation that you've built your entire platform and community on. It's so spot on.
Yeah. And it took us a long time to sort of figure that out too. Right? Because like it wasn't always like that at the beginning. You know, I think I've had my moments where I felt like, oh, I wish my parents were more supportive of me and my chocolate business. The funny thing is, though, when I decided to pivot outside of chocolate and was like, hey, Mom, I'm going to actually take a full-time job and I'm going to table this chocolate thing for a while. Maybe I'll bring it back when I retire. And she was like, why?
Oh, I swear our parents are secretly rooting on these like crazy projects that we take on because they're like, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They're like, we want to be floored that through you.
That's exactly it. I get that feeling all the time. Oh my gosh. Well, I will say you've been incredibly successful with the pod and you've interviewed some really amazing guests like former presidential candidate Andrew Yang and Adele Lim, who was one of the primary screenwriters of Crazy Rich Asians, which I'm sure many of us have seen and love. So I am curious, what's your secret in getting them to agree to come on the show?
Our secret is just asking. I don't know. I think it's a mix of like thick skin and not being afraid to ask.
Which you have. You have both of those characteristics. You've nailed both of those.
Yeah. But yeah, I always joke, Sarah, I feel like at this point, I have probably 2 degrees of separation from any Asian American in the States.
Makes sense.
Just due to, maybe because like I've just worked in so many different industries or spaces and just connected with so many different types of people. But I think that to get to different opportunities, like you kind of have to put yourself out there and just ask. We were lucky in a lot of different ways. So like for the Andrew Yang connection, it was because Lynn actually used to work for him.
Oh.
And so she was able to reach out. I think she just tweeted at him. And this was before he kicked off his presidential campaign seriously. And so he was like, sure, I'll be on your pod. And at the time, like when we launched, podcasts weren't that popular amongst like Asian Americans, right? We were like probably one of the first few Asian pods out there.
You actually bring up a really interesting point about Asians or lack thereof in Asian American conversation. So I do feel like the podcasting space is pretty flooded at this point, and there's more Asian American podcasters. But if you really think about it, even now, only a small number of them have really achieved significant scale. So, I mean, I'm curious what your take is on why this is the case, because we've had trouble scaling in some other industries and getting representation, frankly, in some other industries like entertainment and music and movies and film. So do you feel like this is similar in that case? And what do you feel like is preventing many of us from being able to hit the mainstream?
Yeah, I feel like you're just asking me this really, really difficult question. The truth is, I don't know. I think there's a lot of different factors. There's the fact that Asians only make up 6% of the United States. That's one. And when we did the math for the pod, like so many of our advisors are like, why just Asians? Your numbers are going to be so small. You're never going to be able to make it work. And it's true. It's true. Because if you look at the Asian population, right? We make up 6% of America, even though that's like 20 million people. For our age range, like how many people can actually relate to you? So you probably like cut that in half. And then how many of those people are like most likely bi-coastal or like listen to podcasts even. And I think at the time it was like 26% of all people were listening to podcasts. I'm sure the number is a lot higher now. But if you then look at the demographics.
Before you move any further, by the way, can I just say that I love that you did the numbers? But go on.
You have to. Hey, I'm in marketing, or I was in marketing. Like you gotta know your market size. But yeah, like you think about like, okay, 26% of those people are gonna listen to podcasts. And then you come down to like 4 or 5 million people. For us, like we were talking about careers and like professions, right? So of the people who'd be interested in like people in professions, like you get like 1 million people. And so it's a very small pocket of folks that you're thinking about reaching. So that's probably why like it's hard to scale. That's like number one. Number two, I'm not famous, right? Like I'm sure if Hassan Minhaj or like Aziz Ansari or like, you know, any one of those people with a lot of clout and a lot of followers started a podcast, it would blow up and it would be widely listened to. Or if you think about Asians Enough by the LA Times, like they have a much more significant listenership. The other aspect is when we did the research on like why no Asian pods, like you look around on all of the major distribution channels for podcasts, right? No Asian podcasts, like no Asian hosts as podcasters. But I do think on the flip side, right? Asian Americans have built their own houses and become really popular on YouTube. That's a medium where I think Asian Americans have found tremendous success. Like you look across, and dating myself, and like the only YouTubers like that I know are like Niga Higa and like Wong Fu and Michelle Phan, but they've made a name for themselves on YouTube. There's probably going to be much more channels to scale moving forward. So we kind of, Sarah, you and I kind of like came in and, you know, helped with the foundation a bit, but I think the younger generation is going to take it to the next level.
Yeah, I believe it. I'm hopeful for it. And I think that there's going to be less and less instances and pockets where there's just a lack of representation for Asian Americans moving forward. For my listeners who are now really excited about podcasting, really hopeful, want to be one of the few Asian Americans who are pioneering in this space, but maybe don't know how to start as a podcaster, what's one thing that you'd recommend that maybe they can do tomorrow to get one step closer to that dream?
I can give a few. So maybe instead of just giving one, I can give a few.
Sure.
I think the first thing is listen. Listen to the podcasts that you like and see what they're doing that you enjoy. Because then that will inform you of how you can imagine or envision your podcast sounding like. Because I think the last thing you want to do is put something out there and then being like, about it, right? So listen. The second piece is think about what sort of topics you're interested in talking about and why. And then the third thing is just start recording. There's so many podcasting resources out there today. They will give you step-by-step instructions along with the types of equipment that you should use. Sarah and I were just talking about it this earlier today on what mics we use. We both use the Samsung Q2U mic. It's like $50 on Amazon. You can go ahead and buy it. It plugs right into your computer, and then you can record yourself on GarageBand. It'll sound great. No, don't worry about like being super fancy about it, right? Like the first episode Lynn and I recorded were all on our cell phones, and then I like clipped in maybe like 100 or so different clips into GarageBand and like was editing it for like 20 hours straight. But I think you don't have to fret about the technology. You don't have to fret about, you know, how to be like super exceptionally professional in your editing and like how you sound. I think the key is like people want to hear authenticity. People want to hear something that's interesting or fun. And then people want to get to know you.
I love that. That's such wonderful advice. And I think that you have such an intimacy to the way that you interview as well. And I can see all of that sort of coming through within your show. So I am curious, what's next for you as well as the show? Rock the Boat's not just a podcast, it's also a community, which I think is amazing. It's a flourishing community. And I'm curious how you're going to continue growing this platform.
We are coming up with a season 6, which I'm really excited about.
Woot,
it's
woot.
still in the works. You might hear a familiar voice, Sarah Porritt. I'm trying to prime that so that you can't get out of it, Sarah.
Oh, I'm not getting out of it. Now you can't get out of it. That's the thing.
But yeah, I am working on the concept, and I think it'll be super interesting. I don't want to lock myself in here, but I'll tell you about it afterwards. But it's up and coming. Yeah, up and coming.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. And so for my listeners who maybe want to follow along with your career, join the community, or check out episodes of Rock the Boat, where should they go?
You can go to gorocktheboat.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. Our newsletters are a little few and far in between, but you can join our Slack community. You can follow us along on Instagram. We're at rocktheboatnyc. Or you could just email me whenever at hello@gorocktheboat.com.
Sweet. Well, thanks for spending time with me, Lucia. I loved our chat.
Same. I'm excited to keep doing these chats. It's always so fun. And I feel like every time I speak to you, I learn something new.
And thank you for tuning in to the Hear Us Roar podcast. If you connected with Lucia's journey, please comment and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, pop over to www.hurpodcast.com so that you can stay up to date on all the latest episodes. It's a great way for us to keep in touch so that I can continue to encourage you to see your passions blossom. I'm your host, Sarah Porritt, and until next time.